Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As the Rector of the Board of Trustees, I'm honored to welcome you to the debut of the Brown Alley series in television and film. This inaugural lecture is part of the celebration activities commemorating a pivotal day in the history of the University of Richmond with the dedication of Weinstein Hall. Carol and Marcus, once again, we thank you for your generous support of this series and of the university. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Andy Newcomb, Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences. Andy?
Thank you, Rector Costin. The Brown Alley series honors Dr. Robert Alley, Emeritus Professor of Humanities, and Dr. Irby Brown, Emeritus Professor of English. Bob and Irby, if you would please stand and allow us to recognize your lifelong contributions to the university. Bob and Irby's teaching and research collaboration, examining how the media shapes opinions and values, truly captures the interdisciplinary spirit we hope to achieve in Weinstein Hall. That same interdisciplinary spirit is at the heart of tonight's lecture and the new year-long Weinstein Symposium series, Critical Issues. The Weinstein Hall students and faculty chose Campaign 04 as this year's critical issue. The series begins tomorrow afternoon with a panel discussion featuring Washington Post editor Leonard Downey, professor and political analyst Dr. Larry Sabato, and 4 Weinstein social science students will also join the panel. Tonight's distinguished speaker, Ellen Goodman, one of the nation's most respected journalists, provides a most fitting inauguration for all of the Weinstein Hall events that will come in the years ahead. A Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, Ms. Goodman is known for her astute analysis and articulate evaluation of many of our institutions, including politics and the media. We are delighted that Ms. Goodman has come to share her thoughts on the political is too personal, the trivial is too important, and television news is an oxymoron. Following her remarks, Ms. Goodman will take questions from the audience. When you ask your questions, please use the microphones as tonight's lecture is being taped for National Public Radio. Please join me in welcoming Ellen Goodman.
Thank you. This is such a wonderful room. I feel like I should get married here or buried, or it's so beautiful. I must say that whenever I'm introduced, I think of my favorite credentialing story that happened to me the morning after I won the Pulitzer. I opened up the New York Times, and you know, in the Times they had all these little pictures of all of us, and under my picture it said that I had graduated from college, summa cum laude. And I thought it was very nice of the New York Times to give me a summa since Radcliffe had neglected to. So I wrote a letter to the managing editor of the Times thanking him very much for my summa, and he sent me back a telegram saying, "Oh, it's our pleasure. You are now the first person in American history to have won a Pulitzer and a summa on the same day." That is my claim to fame. So my highest award of my life was, in fact, a newspaper error. And I think this is proper payment for a lifetime in journalism. This is my 25th year as a syndicated columnist. That's has about 2,500 columns. And I remember many years ago overhearing my daughter, who was young at the time, having a conversation with her little friend, and the friend said to her, "What does your mother do?" And my daughter said to her, "Well, my mother is a columnist." And her friend quite properly said, "What's that?" And Katie thought for a while, and then she said, "Well, my mother gets paid for telling people what she thinks." Well, telling people what you think was also the name of a class that I taught at Stanford a few years ago. And when I went out there to teach, I discovered to my horror that in the course catalog, they had named my course Telling People What to Think. So I went down to the registrar and I said, "Oh, Lord." And she very nicely scrambled and she said, "Oh, not to worry, I'll fix it." And she sent out a campus-wide email saying that the name of my course was Telling People How They Think. So I had gone that quickly from being a fascist to being a neurologist. To actually be a columnist, however, I think you need two qualifications. You need nerve and you need endurance. You need the egocentric confidence that your view of the world is actually important enough to write and to be read, and you need the endurance to write day after day, week after week. I have a colleague from Philadelphia who dropped out of this endurance contest some years ago, who said that he explained the business this way. He said that being a columnist is like being married to a nymphomaniac, because every time you think you're through, you have to start all over again. This was a rather unenlightened but fairly accurate analogy. But newspapers in general do two things. They tell people what has happened, and they tell them what it means. And I am in the what it means end of the media business. And over the last years, as our personal lives and our public life have become more complex, as we have been force-fed more and more information, it has become much more important to wrest some kind of meaning from daily events. So as a bona fide member of What It Means journalism, I have the unenviable task of trying to make sense out of the world we live in. I'd like to spend a few of my minutes tonight trying to make sense about what's gone on for a journalist and for a woman in this quarter century that I've been trying to track what it means, trying to track the kind of changes brought to us by the media in the way we think about and write about private and public life, between the personal and the political. I want to talk about how the media dialogue in America often seems to be opinion-hurling contests on television in which people now compete for the most extreme position. And what I think that change means for the way we do and don't deal with our problems in this country, and how today's media functions and dysfunctions in a free society. When I first became a columnist, first started telling people what I think for a living, newspapers still divided life into these nice, neat little sections. Politics, foreign affairs, public policy were out front. Families, home, women, children, relationships, emotions were all put back there, as we used to call it, into the women's pages. Journalism packaged and separated the world into these nice, neat little parts, into genders and into subjects. But men and women didn't stay put, and neither did life. Life, real life, has a way of spilling over the retaining walls. I deliberately set out to write about life as, in fact, we experience it. We are, after all, people who get up in the morning worrying about global warming and our weight, about terrorism and whether there are any clean socks in the drawer. And I always wanted to make the connections between private and public, to write across these retaining walls, to write about life as it is lived. I also began writing columns just about the time the women's movement first hit and began filling the airways with a slogan that said, "The personal is political." That slogan meant many different things originally. As a young mother, it meant that the decision about who did the dishes and changed the diapers in a family could also be a political statement about the power relationships between men and women. As a young journalist, it meant that as long as we wrote about child care or about breast cancer as problems for individuals to be solved one by one, we would have to deal with them all on our own and separately. And yet these were private and public, personal and political issues. But that slogan, "The personal is political," also suggested something about the way we should cover our leaders. It implied that someone's character was fully understood only by knowing someone's private as well as personal, as public behavior. That a leader's personal life carried with it some meaning for everyone's political life. How they behaved to their families, their office staff, had some message about how they would treat their constituents. Where they came from said something about where they were going and where they were leading us. It seemed to me that we couldn't exclude the personal man or woman when we wrote about the political. And I was an advocate of change, of personalizing, even privatizing our coverage. Well, be careful what you wish for. When I was born, Americans knew the president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, solely by his public behavior. They almost never, for example, saw FDR in a wheelchair. There was an understanding among the small Washington White House press corps not to take pictures of the president as he struggled in and out of the wheelchair. In fact, if there was a new photographer who had come to Washington who started to take those pictures, the rest of the photographers would circle the president and actually prevent that. Try to imagine that happening today. When I was in school and JFK was in the White House, there was essentially a gentleman's agreement among the small and nearly all male press corps that they wouldn't tell the little woman, in this case the public, about his private sexual behavior. Slowly, that agreement cracked, as women cracked into the gentleman's business, as we brought with us the view that the personal is political, as we convinced our colleagues that the public should have a wider and deeper view. It wasn't, of course, just women who changed this perspective, nor certainly was it just feminists. After all, feminists have had a wide range of opinions on this subject. Susan B. Anthony, the mother of us all, once wrote, "If a man's record be a clear one, if he has kept his pledges before the world, I do not inquire what his private life may have been." Of course, I suspect that Bill Clinton and Arnold Schwarzenegger would have tested Ms. Anthony quite dearly. Well, the intimacy of the up-close and personal television lens was also a big part of this story. So was the freedom of the baby boomer journalists, the baby boomer irreverence for authority, and passion for spotting hypocrisy. All of this had an effect in changing my profession. By 1987, for example, Gary Hart became the first presidential candidate of the modern era to commit character suicide. That was when adultery first became a national issue. The media went through a period of soul-searching as well. The affair of the Hart, Gary Hart, raised questions about what private infidelity means about someone's fitness for office. Something? Nothing? Does it mean that the wandering husband hates women or loves them? Is someone who is unfaithful to his marriage vows likely to be unfaithful to his campaign promises? Does it say something about his capacity for deception or risk-taking? Or perhaps not. It raised questions about journalism as well. Was journalism just giving the facts or some meaning? Were we gossiping or informing? In the Gary Hart case, we saw an odd coalition emerge, not just between the serious and the sleazy media, but between the religious right and the secular left, between Puritans and feminists, who became the oddest of allies. The left seems to have been concerned with the power relationships between the two sexes, and the religious right with the Ten Commandments. But they both believed that infidelity was a public issue. Well, 5 years after that, by 1992, Bill Clinton ran for office. And the Jennifer Flowers story broke, and the media went through another one of those feeding frenzies. This time, however, the husband talked about causing pain in his marriage. This time the wife was a partner, not a victim, not Tammy Wynette, she said. The statute of limitations on infidelity was surely up, and they had been through a bad patch, but it appeared that it had been patched. It's hard for many of us now to remember this after Clinton survived the primary only to strike again. But many of us in the media at that moment became more comfortable. There was the sense, at least, that the American public was able to put the A word back into the alphabet soup of character. Well, these inherent contradictions, all these trends, all this concern about the personal and the political, about men and women, came into a kind of unrelenting, intolerable, and interminable focus around the late and unlamented Monica Lewinsky scandal. All the pretensions in the media came off. The distinctions between the internet and the New York Times, between sex and policy, between character investigation and scandal mongering, the personal and the political, were lost. There was no newspaper in the country that didn't run transcripts of the tapes. And then again, it happened again this year in the recent, equally late and equally unlamented Arnold Schwarzenegger campaign. The same thing happened to the serial groper. So now it's become harder and harder to figure out when writing about private behavior is a matter of serious character investigation and when it is an invasion of privacy. And if I read the current California returns right, there aren't a whole lot of folks worrying about it anymore. In fact, Maria Shriver seems to have become the new Tammy Wynette, which means I suspect that any day now she'll be running for the Senate. Well, if anything, the American media became less focused in these years on public morality and more focused on private ethics. The National Enquirer, for example, which once had limited itself to telling us about alien children, has now broken stories, whether it was about Jesse Jackson's love child or the Bush daughters' underage drinking or Rush Limbaugh's drug addiction. I guess it's enough to make us all miss those alien babies. But all in all, over this quarter century, before terrorism struck with the sudden ferocity of a plane against a twin tower, there was much use of the word character, but little serious media discussion about how to assess the complex and often conflicting parts of a human life, or the relative importance of public values and private, whether the subject was indeed Bill Clinton or Bill Bennett. I want to add that politics became personal in other ways in this time. Political reporting sometimes became much more of a question of psychology and less a question of policy. We learned, for example, that Al Gore and George Bush were both the sons of famous political leaders. We know that Howard Dean's grandmother was a bridesmaid at George Bush's grandmother's wedding. But we cannot really explain why those profiles and those factoids produce such different politicians or such different politics. We also became much more familiar with our leaders, and in this democratic process of bringing them close, we also brought them and their institutions further down. Politics became so personal, the institutions so thoroughly personalized, that sometimes the Congress seems to us to be nothing more than the dubious sum of its flawed members. Many of us became most conscious of the merger during that Monica Lewinsky scandal, when it seemed to me that the media didn't lose our capacity for making judgment. We didn't lose it, we just gave it up. At one point, for example, the Fox company paid Monica $3 million for an interview. But very self-righteously, they explained that the money wouldn't come from the news division, it would come from the entertainment division. How exactly they knew the difference is beyond me. In fact, it was Fox News that announced Bush's victory during that astonishing roller coaster night of 2000. Or was that too Fox Entertainment? Let me give you a few examples of the kind of infotainment that we now see just from this fall. I mean, there is no better example than the Arnold Schwarzenegger campaign, so forgive me. This is a man who based his entire campaign on a three-word political platform, hasta la vista. He announced his candidacy on Jay Leno. His voters, literally in polls, described him as having leadership qualities which had heretofore only been on exhibit as a Terminator. Well, the good news during this campaign was that the notoriously frivolous local TV stations in California covered more political news in those 7 weeks than they had in the entire previous election cycle. And the bad news is that the political news they covered was, in fact, entertainment. And if you need any more evidence, just 2 weeks ago, when Bob Graham departed from the presidential race, his appearance was bumped to the last few minutes of the Larry King Show in order to devote the necessary amount of time to the story of the tiger that molested its trainer. Need I say any more? Well, a final piece of this infotainment puzzle has fallen into place as journalists, too, become what the television producers call on-air personalities, one of my least favorite job descriptions. We, too, have become part of the new cult of personality. We're not just observers, but participants in this new and high-decibel politics of the yell. Not long ago, I asked some friends if they could imagine a Walter Cronkite or a Walter Lippmann on the Don Imus Show, or on Hardball, or on the O'Reilly Factor, or on the round tables and cable shows that dot the airwaves. The places where journalists sit next to cabinet members and reporters hurl food fights, breaking out over ideas. Television journalism, you will see my little quotation marks, has become a performance and entertainment itself. The shtick trumps the inside. The worst of it, it seems to me, is that everyone, including journalists, are now required to be so certain. No ambivalence need apply to perform on these shows. They actually only do ambivalence by dividing the issues and having two people with absolutes argue it out from either side. I must tell you that I have myself figured out a way to avoid doing these shows, particularly the late night ones. I shouldn't confess this, but I don't do late nights. I can't stay up till 11:30. So when a booker calls, and it's almost always a very nice young person just out of school, and they call to do a kind of pre-interview to see what you think about an issue, and I have found out that the easiest way to get out of doing the show is to just say, well, I have mixed feelings about this. You can hear the phone going back onto the hook. But on television in particular, my own profession of telling people what you think has indeed become somewhat closer to combat sport, the sport of opinion hurling. We have moved into a time when politics has become polarized and political dialogue has become more like a shouting match. I am not sure why certitude is so much the rage, but I am sure that rage is the right word. I have on my desk in my office books written by folks in the telling people what to think media world, and they carry names like useful idiots, treason, stupid white men, lies and the lying liars who tell them. I've just put together a new collection of my columns, and when I was testing out names for this collection, a friend of mine joked that to fit with the tenor of the times, what I should call it is, I'm right, you're wrong, and shut the hell up. I didn't. But today, much of journalism and politics are in a kind of collusion to oversimplify and personalize issues. No room for ambivalence, plenty of room for the personal attack. Yes, be careful what you wish for. So as I look back, 25 years ago, people's real-life concerns were often left out of the political public media dialogue in those not-so-good old days at all. Many of us thought that the personal ought to also be cast as political. Instead, politics has become so personal in every sense of that word, intimate, gossipy, humanized, trivialized, polarized. I've discussed how much of this process was originally driven by some of the good impulses behind the movement of women who were less inclined to maintain this fence between these two worlds. And in no way do I think we should go back. But in some ways I fear that we have come full circle. We haven't even closed the gender gap. Indeed, in the past few years, a kind of new gender gap of sorts has occurred in the new media. In the radio, we have seen the emergence and maintenance of talk radio as this strong political force. The hosts from Rush Limbaugh, should he still be there, to Don Imus, to G. Gordon Liddy are almost entirely men. So are the callers, and so are the listeners on those shows. So for that matter are the cast of Table TV guys, from Chris Matthews to Bill O'Reilly. The subject of these shows is politics, high decibel, dysfunctional politics. At the same time, we've seen an increase in what you would call talk television. There the hosts are most often women, and the audience is overwhelmingly female, largely women at home. The subject of these shows is private life, dysfunctional private life, broken families, soured relationships, an endless parade of hapless, hopeless souls discussing their most intimate problems on the public airwaves, or as my grandmother would say, airing their dirty linen in public, turning the private public with abandon. In the mostly male talk radio world, the subject is politics. In the mostly female talk television world, there is no political content, no political direction or solution. What, after all, can a politician do about sisters who steal your boyfriends, or daughters who strip tease for a living, or any of those subjects that are recycled. The personal is, in their case, apolitical. These two lively worlds of communication are not only divided by gender, but by perspective. The female world is again personal. The male is political, as segregated as ever. It is only on the strangest occasions when, for example, a Rush Limbaugh story somehow morphs into an Oprah subject with an acknowledgement of his addiction to painkillers, that the political becomes personal again. James David Barber once said, "Everybody knows what adultery is, and nobody knows what the word deficit means." Now, to put it in terms that are more familiar to us today, before 9/11, everybody in the country knew who Britney Spears was, and nobody knew who Osama bin Laden was. Today, 90% of the Americans know that J-Lo and Ben are on again. I think. I didn't check today. But 2/3 of the Americans actually still believe that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. I think that the media have had a lot of some shame and some pride since September 11th. Some shame that while we were covering the scandals and sex, terrorists were brewing in our backyard. And some pride. My colleagues took chances and serious work in Afghanistan and in Iraq. They lined up for dangerous jobs of covering war. Readers and viewers wanted information, not attitude. Media moguls worrying about the bottom line in an increasingly tough market threw out the balance sheet and sent reporters overseas. And 10 reporters were killed during those times. We remember that the political was indeed personal, also to the firefighters and financiers in the World Trade Center. But it has also proved very difficult to stay focused on information. Infotainment morphs into entertainment. The media now works in a speed zone. News has become 24/7. The internet has a new edition out every minute, and a scandal is often treated like a commodity to be marketed. No sooner had our friend Schwarzenegger been elected governor than we were and are back to Kobe Bryant. So, where are we now? After 25 years and 2,500 columns, I should be able to offer a perspective for the future. The truth is that journalists are terrible at this. We don't do windows, we don't do futures. But journalism is supposed to be about keeping us connected, keeping in touch, letting us know what we need to know to decide about that fragile thing called a democracy. That's the function of a media in a free society. Many of us, in fact, struggle on a daily basis with the pieces of the infotainment puzzle. We try to parse the line between entertainment and news, infotainment and unreality, also weirdly fused. We struggle, too, with a public that wants to know and doesn't want to know about the private lives of public figures. We struggle with what the attention span really is for Iraq as opposed to, say, Hollywood. I believe Americans can make decisions in a dangerous world. I also believe Americans can learn to make character judgments of our leaders the way porcupines make love, very, very carefully. We need the media to function in a sometimes dysfunctional society. In the past, Americans lived in a small community in which everyone knew everyone else. Today, in Richmond or in Baghdad, we are likely to live in a global community. We know less about our neighbors and much, much more about our public figures. We gossip about them the way we used to gossip about the people next door. But we must nevertheless hold on to the sense that we regained with such pain after September 11th, that the public policy has a lot to do with our lives, that politics matters. We have to patch up those connections. That is the still unfulfilled meaning of the phrase, the personal is political and the political is personal. After 25 years, I know what a tall order that is for journalists and for those of you who read and watch us and sometimes demand more. In fact, sometimes I think that the Beat Generation poet, Jack Kerouac, may well have written the best motto for journalism in the new millennium way back in the 1950s, when he warned us all, walking on water wasn't built in a day. Thank you. Thank you. I am happy to answer questions about, well, actually anything, including anything I talked about or whatever. So, and if I'm having trouble with the light, please just, there, thank you.
Is it difficult for you to make a choice of topic with your broad spectrum and so much happening?
Did you all hear the question, or shall I repeat it? Is it difficult to make a choice of topic with so much happening? Some weeks it's very hard to narrow down when so much is happening. And some weeks it's hard to find exactly one that I feel I have something to offer on. Lately, things have been happening so fast and furiously that there is no trouble at all. When I was writing this morning, when I was writing this week about Rush Limbaugh, it occurred to me that I would never have dreamed that a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So it's often that you're playing, it's often that you are reacting to something that immediately comes up. And then one of the things that I find is people often say to me, oh, you were writing just what I was thinking. And I wasn't writing what they were thinking. I was writing what they were thinking about. That we all opened up the paper in the morning and we saw, for example, the Rush Limbaugh story, and we said, hello? You know, but all of you had to go to perfectly sensible jobs. And and my job that day was to figure out what I thought of this. And in this case, it led me down a searching path, because in fact I wrote a piece, The Confessions of a Liberal Wimp, which is to say the definition of a liberal wimp is someone who actually feels sorry for Rush Limbaugh and what that means in our culture. So it's complicated, but it's really quite a wonderful job that way. Yes.
I'm concerned about the changes that have been proposed for the Federal Communications Commission. I was a little surprised that that didn't figure into your talk tonight. Would you just comment on how that feels from a journalist's point of view?
Well, the question really of too many media owned by too few people, I regard as quite a serious one. And the fascinating thing to me is that, to my delight and surprise, so does the public. And I think that we are in the process of pulling back on that. I'm not going to go into great, extraordinary detail on it, but I think it's a dangerous thing when too many media outlets are owned by too few people. I mean, we've seen that. We know the control.
I'd like to ask what kind of responses you tend to get back from the public when you write about controversial issues. And you had a column recently that I thought, it just really struck me as being very personal and very thought-provoking. And you talked about attending the gay unification ceremony with your nephew.
Cousin,
And
right.
Okay.
It's just
I
okay.
just wondered that.
He's essentially a nephew by age. So,
I wonder what kind of response you got
sure.
from the public.
The larger question, and then I'll go to the smaller one, the larger one is what kind of response I get. And I get a huge response. And in this era, one of the pieces of the huge response is that it says on the bottom of my column, my email address. The curse of email. And, when you tell people what you think, they will tell you what they think of what you think. And for what I think this would be, is there anybody here in need of a PhD thesis topic? Because I have one. Mine is, why do people write so viciously in email? I mean, I have a feeling people don't actually think there's a person getting email, or there's a whole language of email that has come up that is kind of like the talk radio language. So one of the things that happens is I get, when it's a controversial column, I'll get a lot of nasty email. I'll also get nice email and, sort of your basic you go girl email. But everybody in journalism will tell you that people are more motivated to write when they're pissed off than when they're happy. And so that's kind of part of the territory. But the problem with email, too, is that if you actually sit down and try to spend some time answering email, you can't finish it because of the reply button. If you write a response to someone, that isn't the end of the correspondence. You've only encouraged them. So it's complicated because you really want people to feel they can respond to you, they can be in contact with you, and I think that's only fair. At the same time, you could spend your life doing email instead of doing your day job. Now, the second part of that was I wrote a column recently on my cousin Adam's commitment ceremony with his partner, and it was a column that was, with their permission, written about family, and I tried to describe, too, what I felt in generational terms, in a changing family, and that what it felt like to have a member of your family having essentially a gay wedding, and how other people can't say that's anti-family because it's my family. Other people can't tell my daughter and nieces that their marriages and their life as parents are being threatened by their dearly beloved cousins' relationships, because that's not true. So it was both personal and larger. And of course, some people, I think, really heard that and felt it because it was both personal and political, speaking of the topic for the night, because it was both. And some just, are so hostile to the whole idea, just rode right over that and responded in a hostile way. But it's tricky to write about things about people you love, and my cousin Adam's somebody I've, he's the same age as my daughter, and they've all grown up together, and he's essentially a nephew to me, so I wanted to both tell his story, but also do it in a way in which I could still go to Thanksgiving, So.
Ellen, you made an interesting case about certainty and extreme positions being the rage in media right now. Do you have any thoughts about how we might be able to bring back mixed feelings and ambivalence back into favor among readers and audiences?
Well, the irony is that most people have mixed feelings. So that what happens is that people don't see reflected back to them the way they see their view of the world. And I think that's very destructive, and I think there are huge numbers of people who are turned off by that. Think about some of the issues today. Not just the classic ones like abortion or gun control or things. Most Americans are right smack in the mixed feeling department on these things. And when they don't hear these reflected, they become more and more alienated from the whole political system because they don't hear their view of the world in the largest sense and on a narrow one. And I don't know, I think it's up to politicians to figure out a voice in which to do that. It's up to us to demand that, to turn it off. And it's also up to us in the media, it seems to me. And I'm lucky in that my work appears in sort of the last lingering corner of permissive reflection, the op-ed page of the newspaper. So I think on those pages we are still permitted the luxury of complexity and ambivalence to the degree that you can be complex and ambivalent in less than 800 words. There's all this, there's always that. But I think it's really important to, when I write a column, I will often tip my hat to the other point of view or many other points of view, because obviously we don't just have 2 points of view. Because I think it's important for people to know that, yes, I know that you may not agree. Yes, I know where you're coming from. Because that's the only way people can listen to you, is if you have that, as if they have that sense that you aren't shouting them down, but welcoming them into your dialogue. So I also get a lot of mail saying, I don't agree with what you said, but, and that I think is important in a country that has a lot of serious conversations to be had.
When you were studying journalism, how did you...
I wasn't.
Oh, you weren't? Well,
Good.
did you ever start writing, factual articles? Or did you go straight into being a columnist?
Oh, no. Okay. Well, here's the confession. I didn't write for my high school newspaper. I didn't write for my college newspaper. I never took a journalism course. I didn't create a little newspaper in my neighborhood and deliver it when I was 7 years old. I am a education-free zone. I did, however, when I graduated from college, without that summa cum laude, I got a job at Newsweek magazine as a researcher, and then started doing freelance reporting. And then I was a reporter for 10 years before I ever wrote a column. People have this sense that being a columnist, you suck your thumb and just write. As a columnist, you do all the reporting you ever did as a reporter, or you're sunk. Because you have to do all this. Say if you're a reporter and you go out and you cover a story and you say the police chief said today and the victim said today, etc. But if you're a columnist, you would have to say the police chief said, the victim said, I say. So you have to know, particularly if it's a complex, say, ethical issue or if it's a complex public policy issue, you have to do all the reporting. You have to call all the people you ever called before in your entire life. And then at the end of it, you have to say what you think. And you have to do, and being a columnist is tricky because you don't want to open up the paper 2 days later and say, what did she say? You want to say, what did I say? You have to tell, people are waiting to hear what you think about something. So you have to feel confident. You have to think and come out the other end of all that reporting. So being a reporter is an enormous part of the job. Now I realize, having said that not every columnist today began in the reporting tradition. Many of us who have lasted the longest have come out of that tradition, but certainly not everyone, but I'm very biased in favor of the reporting tradition. Did that answer your question? Or?
Kinda.
Kinda. Try again. Go ahead. We allow follow-ups.
I was just going to ask how you changed from filtering opinion out to focusing your writing on.
Oh, I was always opinionated. My editor, the late Tom Winship, who I love dearly, used to say that he gave me a column to get my opinions out of the news hole. So that's a slight exaggeration. But there was a point at which I really wanted to say what I thought and not to filter it out. So I, at a point, my newspaper was had welcoming op-ed pieces from in-house reporters, and I did maybe 6 the first year, and then I started doing it once a week, and then I went full-time after that. So I kind of gradually eased into it.
Here at U of R, there's pretty solid support for English language and writing programs, but I was wondering, it seems that there are a lot of schools that emphasize and very much support maybe technology programs or fancy research projects, and a lot of times the English department or sort of writing-oriented programs are sort of left, and I'm wondering what you think of why that might be and what you think the value of English and language programs is in a democracy.
Well, I also never took an English course. No. It's like, I'm going to be drummed out of here. Either that or somebody's going to make me come for a refresher course.
Don't tell our students.
I think, can I change it around a little? I think the capacity to communicate in any subject is essential. If you, and one of the problems that the academy, as people like to call it, has, is that in graduate school they often deliberately teach people how not to write. It's kind of a process by which you specialize and specialize and specialize, and you start writing in a kind of jargon until the only other person who can understand is your thesis advisor. And in fact, if you write in a colloquial and personable and amusing style, you probably won't get your PhD. So I'm not saying that here since I don't know, but I've had a fair amount of experience with academic life and academic writing, and I think to a certain degree it's been death on writing. And I would love to see just the opposite. I would love to have, I was a history major. You see, I did take some subjects, actually. You'll be happy to know. And I think that to write a history paper in a user-friendly way that somebody might actually want to read who wasn't being paid to read would be extremely important. And just to be able to stand up and communicate. And I would add, I think this is particularly true for women. One of the things that is complicated about being a woman who tells people what she thinks is that many women, girls, have traditionally been trained not to do this or not to make people mad at them. If you're in my business, you're going to make people mad at you. And I think it's great experience. Who is traditionally considered to be the most successful female political figure? Margaret Thatcher. And because she stood up in Parliament while people yelled and screamed at her, and she just held her ground and kept going, and she learned how to communicate her opinion. This is not, I'm not going back on my anti-food fight journalism thing, but you have to learn how to stand with your opinion. There's probably someone here from the student paper, and that's the hardest job that there is, to write in your hometown or your own community. When I was first writing in my hometown, which is Boston, people would come up to my mother in the street and they would say, "And she used to be such a nice child." So you got to be able to, take a good deal of that and just stand with it. And I think that's something that you have to learn to communicate. And I went way off from your original question.
You've talked about polarization in the media, and it seems to me that polarization is a part of the American political process, increasingly so. Mrs. Thatcher, whom you just quoted, actually was so divisive in the United Kingdom that there are no Conservative members of Parliament in Wales and only one left in Scotland. So it's almost reduced the country to a polarization between North and South, East and West. It seems to me that something similar is happening here.
Here it's red and blue.
Well, or whatever it is. In the Richmond Times-Dispatch this morning, we were reminded that Bob Dole said of Clinton, he is my opponent, he is not my enemy. And yet now I see, as an outsider, I see this place breaking down into enemies. And if you don't have a large enough consensus, then the whole democratic process will break down. You have to have extremes arguing about extremes, but you must have a consensus. Do you see the consensus breaking down? And if so, what's the future of democracy in America?
A small question. Another thesis topic, perhaps? I can't conceivably answer that whole thing, but I see contradictory things happening. I see a passion for polarization because it drives the most ardent voters to the polls, to the pocketbooks. So I see a deliberate polarizing process. But when you talk to actual real-life human beings, when you think about Americans, when you even poll Americans, I think there is this great area of ambivalent agreement, or agreement on ambivalence, or thinking about things. For example, if you asked people about Iraq, what do most Americans think? Most Americans are among the worried well, the worried, okay, they're uneasy. They're not sure that we did the right thing. They're not sure. They think pretty much that we can't get out having done the right or the wrong thing. They're not sure whether we were misled. I mean, you know what I'm saying. I don't have to go into enormous detail. I think there is, in fact, a tremendous sense of shared values, too. It's just that we're being polarized out the ends of it, sometimes deliberately, because that drives the most ardent supporters. And that's a true problem in this democracy. Yes?
I love your work on women's issues and family issues. I have a two-part question for you. It seems to me today my students and other 20-somethings consider feminism to be irrelevant, and they especially don't like to be called feminists. So I'm wondering if you think that feminism is irrelevant, given your comments about the gender gap being as present as ever.
Well, Generation Y, is that what it is now, as I understand it? I'm not too worried about the fact that they, let me try this sentence again. My generation sometimes says, oh, they don't appreciate all the hard work we did. We walked 4 miles in the snow to school, we knocked down all the doors, and look at them, they're taking it all for granted. Well, I must say, that's what we wanted. We wanted young women to be able to take it for granted, that they could start in any professions that they wanted. What my generation knows that I fear Generation Y doesn't know is that once you get through the entry-level position, you are going to hit the glass ceiling and the family work wall, if you will, and that not as much has changed out there. Now, there's something to be said for a generation that just assumes they'll be able to do everything. because perhaps they won't be turned away as easily. There's nothing quite as powerful as the assumption that this is your right. At the same time, one of the big problems for the college-age generation now is there's no sense of collective action. There's a sense that we can all do it by ourselves as individuals, but there's no sense of community or collectivity. And that I am troubled by. And I think that has really been a change in generation. Because, in fact, when they do hit the glass ceiling, when they do hit the troubles with changing, with taking care of children and taking care of business, they're going to once again think it's something that they have to figure out and work out on their own. And you can't. There's no way you can change the education system or the healthcare system or the childcare system one person at a time. So there is that great need for collective action, which is part of the strength of feminism. They don't want to share the title, and I don't care. Call yourself, purple. I don't care. But collective action and social change is great. I mean, I call myself a feminist proudly because it's part of a 100-year-old historic movement for equality among women. I think that's something to be proudly a part of. But
Good evening, Ms. Goodman. Up here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have
Hi.
I neglected other people up there?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
You spoke earlier about fidelity to one's own opinion, like with regard to your opinion. And I know throughout my academic life, deadlines have often caused me to formulate opinions in haste, and that often, and that tends to disenfranchise either the quality of your opinion or the importance of it. And my question to you is, because I know you live a life of deadlines, you've written a lot of articles. You live a life of deadlines, and how do you prevent these deadlines from almost making you rush opinions and then possibly having to risk the problems of hindsight proving you wrong?
Brilliance. Every once in a while, you do live with that. Sometimes you're writing a column, and you get to on the one hand this, and on the other hand this, and then you get down to, okay, pal, which hand are you going with today? Now, occasionally, if you get there, and in fact, it's such a complicated issue that you aren't there, you just haven't got it. You can wimp out, more or less, with this situation bears watching kind of ending. This is the generic editorial conclusion that we all it's sort of an inside joke among, it's sort of an inside joke among editorial writers. It's kind of in what you call a save-get bin in the computer, okay, this situation bears watching. But generally, I try not to start something that I don't know where I'm going to go, so that I don't hit the panic button on deadline. Occasionally, but I don't generally hit that panic button. I try to, I might be juggling a few things. Like this week, I've been thinking about, for example, the case in Florida with the woman who had the plug pulled, or who was stopped being fed, and which is a really interesting bioethical question. And I've also been thinking about the silicone breast implants, and part of the thinking process is, and part of the reporting process, because sometimes I'll report 2 columns, and then I'll say, which one of these am I ready to go with? And I try not to go with something until I feel centered about it. I mean, sometimes I do. Sometimes I live to regret it. And occasionally I live to undo it. Occasionally I will write something and then another year later I will say, guess what? Circle false on my answer sheet. But my suggestion, if that's what you're asking for, is to don't start till you know where what you think. Does that help? Okay. But of course I assign myself. You probably get assignments. Yes.
I was just wondering if you think that the media has almost too much influence on public opinion, which can in turn shape policy. So is the media somewhat changing politics?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that you could say that the media is such a large word. I mean, do you include in the media political ads? You know.
Just like I'm a politics and journalism
Yeah.
major, and so we always get into arguments in some of my classes where the media shows this side of the story, and public opinion wants war in this country because of that, and so then the media is somewhat manipulating the public. That's one argument, that the public encourages politics. So the media is essentially...
I just don't think there's one answer to that. I think you could look back through history, and you could look at what Hearst did, you know, in one war, and you could answer it one way. You could look at you could look at Vietnam and answer it another way. I mean, I just don't think there's one answer to that. I mean, certainly the Bush administration now is talking about the media filter. But to him it means that we should be giving the good news from Baghdad rather than the body count. So everybody has another view on who's controlling whom, because his view would be that he should control the media, and that when he's not controlling the media, it's a filter. And when he is controlling the media, it's pure. So it's an old question.
You had mentioned the need for a functional media in a somewhat dysfunctional society. How dysfunctional has society become, and how much, similar to that previous question, how much role can the media, our entertainment blending into politics and our politics blending into media, have on our society?
Well, I think one thing that is dysfunctional is that Americans don't vote. I mean, it's pretty simple. Let's take something, really rudimentary. Americans aren't voting. And I don't know what the media can do about that per se, except that I think that all of this polarization and all of this dueling certitudes and the similar polarization of political life makes a lot of people think a pox on all their houses and to not vote. So that would be just one small piece of the puzzle, and I don't really know how to answer the larger piece of it, although certainly if you have another thesis topic. Can you rephrase the question once, and then I'll try again?
You had mentioned the need for a functional media, and I think of our own Richmond Times-Dispatch, and the need for a national debate where it is functional, where in society it has become somewhat, in certain people's minds perhaps, dysfunctional. And the media doesn't seem to function along the Walter Cronkite format. It has become dysfunctional with the Rush Limbaughs, the
Right.
Sean Hannitys, and I think people like you, people feel that there is still some functionality to our media, which we've been lacking.
I certainly think this is my prejudice, that print is doing a better job of it. And there are some interesting statistics about that back me up, which is that people who read newspapers are more likely to vote. and more likely to be involved in their community. I don't know whether there's a chicken or an egg, but I think that there is that piece of it that comes. And I'm not going to give you much more of a satisfying answer to that very large question at the moment, but I'll give it some thought. How's that? I think we have time for one more question, if there is. If there is. Well, thank you very much.
Ellen, thank you so much for your comments tonight. We have a small gift for you here, and we also know that you are a big Red Sox fan.
Yes.
And we just wanted you to know that in the top of the third, Boston is leading 3-0.
And they haven't killed Pedro. The fans, I meant.
So thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the University of Richmond, let me thank all of you for joining us for the Brown Alley series in television and film. We hope that you enjoyed the program, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in the future for one of the next university-sponsored events. So thank you, and good evening.